Just expand on that. Why does it raise questions about the level playing field?
Well, a new party coming in, new candidates coming in would not likely have any contributors from the past. So immediately they fail a gap of not only of the spending limit, but at a 20% more.
And it may favor parties that have those previous donors.
It looks like it, yeah.
Let's talk about your role. One of the sections, Section 18, talks about your ability to communicate with the public. It's been a big part of your role. Even the interviews that you've done here on CBC Radio's The House, the kind of things that you want to measure public sentiment on why people vote and get understanding of the electorate. Do you feel now, as you read through, that limits your ability to do something? Explain your reaction to the role around what you can do concerning engagement with the public.
Well, I think there's a very broad clause in the Act that's basically saying from now on, when this comes into force, Elections Canada cannot communicate with the public here or around the world about anything other than how and when to vote or where and when to vote.
In other words, this interview, if this bill passes, you couldn't do this interview with me.
Your range of questions would have to be quite restricted, as long as you ask me questions about where and when to vote.
Your opinion on a piece of legislation, you wouldn't be allowed to talk about.
That's interesting, because when I'll be called in Parliament, that will raise an interesting issue at that point. Most of the reports that we publish will no longer be published.
Most of the reports will no longer be published?
No, most of the research will no longer be published, because these are communication to the public and they don't necessarily always deal. Commissioner issued a report regarding his activities. Right. That has nothing to do with how and when to vote, so these reports will no longer be available. And in fact, not only available, I don't think it would be done at all.
So, and give me an example of what that will mean. I mean, for someone listening who might not be familiar with some of your reports, what's a report that you believe is important now that you won't be able to do if this passes?
Well, all the reports we've done and the research and the report we've done on electors' behavior, why they vote, what is the issue with young voters, for example, who are facing challenges over the years. Elections Canada has published numerous studies on Aboriginals, on new citizens, on young people. More and more we're looking, because that's going to be an issue in the next few years, about seniors voting and the challenges they're facing.
Could you do a survey if this is passed? Could your office do a survey?
Again, it's hard to tell that a survey, presumably, as long as the survey is to question about when and where to vote. But beyond that, I'm not sure. That's not my reading of the Act right now. It says, basically, my reading of the Act is that I can no longer speak about democracy in this country, except 2 points: where and when to vote.
Sir, do you feel muzzled?
I would say that I'm not aware of any electoral bodies around the world who cannot talk about democracy.
You are not aware of any other electoral body around the world that would be incapable of speaking about democracy. You're saying this would be the most restrictive rules around any electoral officer in a democracy? That
I'm aware of, yes.
How does that make you feel?
Well, I think it's something that should be worrisome for. I don't think it reflects a model democracy that Canadians aspire to.
So what's your next step?
I'll share my views with Parliament in due course if they call me, and I'll try to explain the provisions of the bill, their impact, and they will have to determine what needs to be done with the bill.
Finally, one last question on your role. Pierre Poilievre said the reason that they're restricting your ability to talk to the public, and I'm quoting him, political candidates who are aspiring for office are far better at inspiring voters to get out and cast their ballot than our government bureaucracies. Your comment.
I find it's an interesting comment, because I've also heard other comments from the minister saying that all the efforts of Elections Canada have been fruitless given the declining turnout. And there's 2 points I would make on this. The first point is that parties are at it and the turnout is declining. The second point is that this is, to me, a fundamental issue for any democracy. And nobody owns turnout, but it requires a collective, collaborative approach of the whole society. If turnout continues to decline at the pace they've been declining over the last 40 years, we have to question in the next several years, we'll have question about the legitimacy of our government and how representative they are. And I think that's why we need to be concerned about it now and start taking actions.
Does this piece of legislation help or hurt your concerns around that?
Well, certainly I won't be able to talk about it anymore.
Mr. Mayrand.
Nor support, so should I say support programs. I have a very nice program in schools across the country. It's called Student Vote. Reach out to 300,000 youth. That program is gone under this new legislation.
That program is gone.
Well, I can't do it anymore. So those who run it will have to go elsewhere.
And the cost to democracy?
Well, I think we'll have to watch over time.
Mr. Mayrand, I always appreciate you coming on our program and speaking to us for as long as you can at this point. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
That's Marc Mayrand, the head of Elections Canada. We'll talk more about this issue with our in-house panel of Emmanuel Latraverse and Chris Hall in a few minutes. All right, let's go back to stories that we may not be paying enough attention to because of the Olympics and other noise going on, with the proposed changes to the election laws, the so-called Fair Election Act, introduced by the Minister of Democratic Reform, Pierre Poilievre. I spoke with the Chief Electoral Officer, Marc Mayrand, earlier on this program. He was very clearly very upset. I would say a quiet fury when he was discussing some of the changes. Here's one example.
Basically, my reading of the act is that I can no longer speak about democracy in this country except 2 points: where and when to vote.
Sir, do you feel muzzled?
I would say that I'm not aware of any electoral bodies around the world who cannot talk about democracy.
How does that make you feel?
Well, I think it's something that should be worrisome for. I don't think it reflects a model democracy that the Canadians aspire to.
Worrisome. He was choking back words there. It was an emotional response, Chris. What do you make of this back and forth between the government, Elections Canada, Marc Mayrand, and the proposed changes?
Well, look, I think that if you look back over the last 3 election campaigns, that the Conservatives have had a running battle with Elections Canada. They think and will say that it's biased as an agency against the Conservatives. It began with the in and out, moving advertising money between local and national campaigns. We've had a number of Conservative MPs investigated, a couple charged with Election Act violations. I didn't see anything in the documents and what was put out by Pierre Poilievre this week that suggested to me that they needed to take away the authority of Marc Mayrand and the commissioner who investigates complaints and put it in the hands of the Director of Public Prosecutions. That, in my view, and I don't think anybody who would normally look at that would say they felt he was biased and they were enacting legislation because of that.
Mm-hmm. Emmanuel, how do you read this?
I think what's interesting about this bill is it's a two-pronged approach in a way. It goes to the core of the ideology, I think, of this government, taking away the power of Elections Canada, redistributing it in a way, away from it. And the core of that, some of these agents of Parliament, in their view, have too much power, have too much free reign. And so I think that's part of what they did. What's interesting also is the depth of the measures they have put forward to really tighten a lot of the election rules around fraud, penalties, robocalls, and it reveals the extent to which they do sense that they have been made vulnerable by all this debate and that they need to present an argument to Canadians that they are not the party of fumbling the rules when it comes to elections. And so I think that's part of the greater political purpose of this bill, is to kind of find a way to re-insulate themselves against these attacks.
The thing that I was most stunned by was it was barely introduced and they were already moving to limit the debate on this very important change to the role of the Elections Canada and of the Chief Electoral Officer.
They do have a few goodies in there that kind of primarily serve them, and I think that's what kind of taints the debate and feeds the critics around the criticisms around this bill, whether it's raising the contribution limits, the spending limits in terms of elections. Those are all tools that will benefit them first than anyone else. And the core problem is they haven't been able to answer the fundamental reason why they had to take power away from Elections Canada.
All right, I got to leave it there. Emmanuel Traverse and Chris Hall, thanks for making politics, I think, an important Olympic event. I mean, I think it's
a
important.
Great sport.
That's right.
It certainly is. And it gets more interesting every day.
Thanks, guys.
You're welcome.
Here are a few things we're keeping an eye on as we stand on House Watch. The RCMP has been investigating Mac Harb, former Liberal senator, and suspended Conservative Senator Patrick Brazeau for almost a year. This week, that Senate scandal reached another stage when both were charged.
The RCMP has proceeded to charge Mr. Brazeau and Mr. Harb with 1 count each of breach of trust and fraud under sections 122 and 380 of the Criminal Code.
Now, we're all waiting to see if any other senators under investigation, like Pamela Wallin or Mike Duffy, will also be charged. We've got our eye on that. We'll also be watching, of course, Budget Day very closely on Tuesday, and for ongoing political coverage throughout the week on every political issue, you can always go to cbc.ca/politics or join me on Power and Politics on CBC News Network. We kick it off every weekday starting at 5 p.m. Eastern. On Budget Day, we'll have an early pre-show and a special coverage of the budget live on Parliament Hill and on CBC Radio. Alison Smith will be having special coverage as well at 4 p.m. Eastern on CBC Radio as well. Our crew on the House, always on the gold medal podium. Producer, Kristen Everson. Technical producer, Paul McInnes. Our senior producer is Nick Gamache. 3 golds right there. It's a team sport here on the House. I'm Evan Solomon. Enjoy the Olympics. Keep politics in your mind. It's always going on. And yes, the House will be back in session in 7 days.